To let us know that, that a change is going to come. We may have been knocked down. We have gone to people who just didn't want to hear what we had to say. But what I hear from this song is that he didn't walk away with hopelessness, but he found ways to inspire hope. And I want you to know today that you truly are a hope inspirer, a hope that comes with inspiration. So again, please allow me to say good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Lunch and Learn, hosted by the Black Appalachian Coalition. I am Bishop Marcia Dinkins, and it's a privilege to have you all here today for today's essential conversation on environmental justice and building a clean energy economy. We're bringing together community voices and thought leaders to explore how we can collectively work toward a sustainable future that centers equity and justice for Black communities in Appalachia. Today's event is made possible through the collaboration and support of both the Ohio River Valley Institute and Main Street. We are incredibly grateful for their partnership in advancing these critical conversations and for their shared commitment to environmental justice, economic equity, and sustainable development for all our communities. We know that Black and marginalized communities have disproportionately suffered the impacts of environmental justice, from poor air and water quality to climate change. But today's discussion isn't just about the challenges, it's about the powerful opportunities that lie ahead as we advocate for environmental justice and build a clean economy, energy economy that works for all. I want to take a moment to say thank you to each of you for all that you do. You are truly the change agents, the game changers, and the instruments of change in this fight for justice and equity, not just for some, but for all. I remind you that a change is going to come because of your unwavering commitment, your vision, and your leadership in this critical work. We are honored to have three remarkable speakers with us today, each of whom brings a unique and vital perspective to this issue. Our first guest is Dr. Jelon White Newsome, Federal Chief Environmental Justice Officer in the White House Office of Environmental Justice. Dr. White Newsome has been a national leader in climate resilience and public health, and her work focuses on integrating equity into climate policy and developing community-driven solutions. Our guest who will join us later will be Sonia Kakiri, who is the National Director of Policy and Civic Engagement for the Emerald Cities Collaborative, where she advocates for clean energy development and ensures communities are empowered to thrive in the green economy without being left behind. Last but not least, we have Dr. Patricia DeMarco, an environmental advocate and author whose decades of work in energy policy and sustainability have championed a clean energy future that preserves both the environment and the health of our communities. Her leadership in advocating for renewable energy solutions and policy platform has been a guiding light for the movement towards sustainability. Together, our distinguished speakers will help us think critically about how we can align environmental justice with the transition to a clean energy economy, ensuring that our communities are at the center of these transformations, benefiting from the economic, health, and environmental gains that come with it. This is truly a moment for us to explore actionable solutions, learn from our experts, and engage in deep conversations about the future we want to create and the legacy that we want to leave. So you know what? I encourage you to ask questions, share your thoughts, and be an active part of this discussion. Again, I want to thank you for joining us today. And without further delay, let's begin. And I'll turn the floor over to Dr. Jelon White Newsome to get us started. Welcome, Dr. Newsome, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Bishop, for that beautiful introduction. You can never go wrong with Sam Cooke. And I love I was looking at your sweatshirt where it says born to race. And I'm just thinking about, we have a long race ahead of us, but we're divinely designed to do just that. So thank you again for your leadership and for this coalition on the Ohio River Valley Institute and the other organization that really created this space to have this conversation. So again, my name is Jelon, and my friends and family call me Dr. J. So whatever floats your boat, but again, I had an opportunity to review your website just to really get a sense of the work that you all are engaged in. And reading some of the entries and just the work and the folks that you represent is wonderful and needed. And I look forward to learning more from you in this conversation. I'll say Ohio and West Virginia hold a special place in my heart. I was born in Ohio, so very connected there. But also my stepfather is from Charleston, West Virginia, and he's been in my life for over 30 years now. And there never goes a day where he doesn't speak to the generations, his father, grandfather, and cousins that grew up in the mines and the racism they experienced, but also the strength of the Black community. And the fact that he just had a reunion a couple weeks ago, and they're all in their 80s and 90s and just so tight and so close and just so full of powerful stories. And again, it's just always amazing to feel like I know Charleston because of my stepfather. So again, just deep gratitude to you all, deep gratitude to the history that you all are keeping. And again, I always give deep gratitude to my ancestors and the fact that, as I say all the time, this little brown girl that was born in Ohio but raised in Detroit and now in the White House is not something that I take for granted. And I know I stand on the shoulders of so many that came before me. So again, just so appreciative of being here. For those of you that are maybe not familiar with CEQ, if we were in person, I would ask that question. Normally, I get one or two folks that know what CEQ, the Council on Environmental Quality, is. Maybe I'm talking to a savvy group here, but I never assume people know. The Council on Environmental Quality is part of the Executive Office of the President. And we basically help deliver the president's agenda. So President Biden says, this is what I want to do from an environmental standpoint, and we help him do that, working alongside our federal agency partners. Now, what I like to say is that we don't give away money, we don't regulate, we don't enforce. But some of our superpowers include convening folks and, again, working with our agency partners and being a conduit to make sure that the White House remains the people's house. So I do a lot of these kinds of conversations. We have structures, formalized structures for making sure the public voice is heard and it informs and shapes our policy. So that is really our role at the Council on Environmental Quality. So before I jump in, I think it's important to share a little bit about what has shaped me and why this work for me is more than a job, but I consider it in many ways a ministry. I grew up in a family of public servants. It was ingrained in me early that you're put on this earth to serve more than yourself. And that's what I've tried to do over my career. I grew up in a place where I saw powerful, dynamic African-American leaders. My home church is the church of the late, great Aretha Franklin, where her father was Reverend C.L. Franklin, very much a part of the civil rights movement. And so I grew up just watching folks speak up and speak out about injustice and all sorts of things. And so that is kind of where I come from, and a mom and a grandmother that literally took care of the community. We had people always staying in our house for whatever reason. And so that kind of upbringing, coupled with my nerdiness, my love for science and technology and engineering, really drove me to start asking some questions very early on. I had an internship in high school at a big chemical company, which I will not name, but basically that chemical company was engaged in some things that were questionable. And as a budding chemical engineer, I wanted to know what were the policies and practices that you were putting in place to protect the surrounding community. The fact that you were making chemicals that were being transported through these railways that went through Black and brown and low income communities. And oftentimes, most of the derailments or upsets happen in those communities. And to me, that was not a coincidence. That was just in Michigan, but it was happening everywhere. And so really having that exposure to the chemical industry and the industry as, broadly, really drove me to start asking those questions. And that kind of catapulted me into, again, going a little bit deeper and really digging into environmental justice when I really didn't know what environmental justice was. I didn't have the terminology, but, working as an engineer for several years, working in communities that were on the fence line of so many industries, and learning that this phenomenon that I saw in Michigan, eventually on the south side of Chicago, in the heart of Texas, and all the places that I lived, that it was not something that was an anomaly. So very much when I got my degree in engineering, I committed myself to being what I call an environmental justice engineer. Again, and that led me to making sure that everything that I did, involved people. So even if we were producing something that was crazy, I made sure that we made contact with the neighbors so they understood what was happening and tried, again, my best to prevent hurt and harm. So again, that vision that I had for environmental justice was not only grounded, in the way I was brought up, but in what I saw very early on in high school and on to realize that there is a better way to do this. And so when I think about this administration in particular, and the fact that they actually care and acknowledge that there are disparities out there, particularly between our Black and Brown and Indigenous folks when it comes to environmental protection, that is a blessing that we can't take for granted, because I'm sure you can understand that just a couple of years ago, it was different. And so when I think about the vision for environmental justice and the fact that everybody deserves to breathe clean air, drink clean water, live in an environment where they can grow and thrive and support their family, that is why we are all here today. And it is a vision that is deeply shared by President Biden, by Vice President Harris, and the fact that they have created the most ambitious environmental justice agenda in history, we cannot discount that. So my job is to basically put that agenda into action. And with my time here today, and again, just pull the hook if I'm talking too much, because I tend to talk a lot, but I want to really try and focus on a couple of things. One, I want to make sure that you understand what the environmental justice efforts are that are a part of this administration. Secondly, I want to touch on some of the aspects and efforts that should be benefiting Appalachian communities. And third, just again, re-emphasize how we need each of you to make President Biden's vision a reality. So I don't know if I can start. I forgot I even had some slides. Let me see if I can. Oh, there they go. Thank you, Ben. All right. So if you all, let me know if you can see my slides.
Looks great. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. You are so kind, because usually it doesn't work for me. Okay. So this was me a long time ago, as a little engineer, probably about 20, 30 pounds lighter. But let's dig into really talking about the administration. So during President Biden's first week in office, he signed Executive Order 14008. And this was critical because it launched the most comprehensive environmental justice agenda ever. A lot packed into it. If you haven't read it, check it out. But one of the initiatives that he created out of this executive order was the Justice 40 initiative, which we'll speak to a little bit later. Now, that was the first executive order he signed his first week in office. But just last year, President Biden signed, after 30 years of the first environmental justice executive order, another one focused on revitalizing our nation's commitment to environmental justice for all. Now, again, a lot of folks are like, EOs, executive orders, no big deal. They are a big deal, because what this one in particular does, that the president signed last year, is basically says that environmental justice is not an option for any of your federal agencies. So I don't care if you're the Department of Energy, Department of Interior, or, Small Business Association. You have to have your mission and your work aligned to make sure that it is upholding and advancing environmental justice. It also puts some other things in place that our agencies have to develop strategic plans. They have to develop measures of accountability on how they're progressing on environmental justice. And actually now we have the first federal definition of environmental justice for the federal government, which again is not maybe a big deal to most folks, but it is a huge deal. Because we know that if you have several definitions and folks are doing different things, that if you don't have some constant or some standard operating procedure that people are working off of, in this case, our agencies, then their definitions and the outcomes and outputs can be all over the place. So the signing of this executive order was monumental. So when I think about the initiative, the Justice 40 initiative, which hopefully most of you are aware of, really the goal is to make sure that 40% of the overall benefits of the billions of dollars that this administration is putting out through grants, through technical assistance, et cetera, the goal is that these benefits get to what we call disadvantaged communities, which are those communities that have been overburdened by pollution and disinvested in. And particularly in the areas of clean energy, climate, affordable housing, sustainable water development, et cetera. A lot of these investments are from President Biden's Invest in America agenda, which is where Justice 40 is. And it is literally about $613 billion out there that are primed for Justice 40 programs. So again, part of the beauty of this is that for the first time in a long time, and if you talk to, some environmental justice advocates, there's money dedicated to environmental justice, which has never been there. And so now the goal is, again, how do we get that money to the communities and folks that need it the most? And the other thing that I always like to emphasize is not the money is important, but it's not just about the money. The things that are undergirding the Justice 40 initiative is the fact that agencies are doing things in ways that they have never done it before. They are actually thinking about, well, boy, if this is my population that I need to meet where they are, how do I actually change, my notice of funding opportunities, or the way that I engage, or the way that we have, our briefings on how folks can take advantage of these grants? Agencies are changing the way they operate as a part of the Justice 40 initiative so we can actually try and meet that goal and be realistic. Because again, in one of my many former lives, I was a grant seeker. I worked for a community-based organization. A lot of my work was writing grants. And sometimes it takes, 25 degrees and letters behind your name to figure out how the system even works. And so we know that that is a barrier, particularly for low capacity organizations. And so how do we make sure that those barriers aren't the things that prevent us from reaching the president's vision? So the Justice 40 initiative is more than money. It's about changing the culture, but also trying to remove those barriers that we know historically have just kept folks that need the resources away from it. And so this is a QR code, and if you're able to get it, fantastic. We also have it online, but it just shows the list of programs, over 500 programs that are Justice 40 programs. And the hope is that there might be some things that you are working on from an organizational perspective that, again, you want to reach out to this agency because they have this program. So I encourage you to do that so you can, again, take advantage of what this administration is offering. Now, the question that, again, we always get is, how do agencies know where to focus or where those disadvantaged communities are? Well, the president told us to make a tool to do that. The Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool, better known as the CJS, is a mapping tool. It's online. Google it. The beauty of this is that it shows communities by census tracts, and they are either characterized as disadvantaged or not. And all of our agencies, every federal agency has to use this tool to help them meet the directive of the Justice 40 initiative. So there is no longer this excuse that you don't know where communities with environmental justice concerns are, because you have a tool to help with that. So I encourage you, again, to make sure you know that this tool exists, use it, encourage your state agencies and your local agencies to use it. The data, again, is quality controlled and quality approved. So please make sure that you're aware of this tool. Now, the other piece around environmental justice is huge accountability, right? So one of the things that the president wanted to make sure is that we had some type of tool that really upped the level of transparency about what we were or what we were not doing as a federal government in terms of progressing on environmental justice. What I will say is that our environmental justice scorecard is that tool. It is not us making this effort to grade agencies or compare them. So it's not a scorecard, but it's actually a way to show progress. We just recently launched the update of what we call phase 2 of the scorecard. So last year was a baseline. This year, or this summer, a couple months ago, we released phase 2 of the EJ scorecard. Again, I encourage you to check out that scorecard. It is designed by agency, where you can see what specific agencies are doing to address civil rights, environmental enforcement, Justice 40, et cetera. There's qualitative and quantitative data. So we got numbers and stories. And again, it's also some points where agencies really are transparent and like, yeah, we're doing well here, but there's also some areas where we need to continue working. Why this is important to you, because this is a tool that I hope advocates like yourself will use this as an accountability tool. So when you have your conversations with agencies, you can ask them like, what's up with this, or what's going on, or how can I take advantage of this? So please, again, for particular agencies that have programs that you're interested in learning more about or benefiting from, this again is another tool that can be used for accountability. And so this list just shows you all the different federal agencies that are a part of the scorecard. So I think the other piece, when we talk about, again, advancing environmental justice, I mean, environmental justice is definitely, it's a federal thing, but I was always taught by my mentors that EJ is local at its heart, right? So we can have all this great stuff going on at the federal government and trying to get money out and all that stuff, but really sometimes when it comes down to it, it is those local, those city, those state decisions that drive whether your community sees change or not. And so there's several pieces to the president's agenda where there has been a focus on areas within Appalachia. And just a couple of things that I'll name, and you probably know better than me, because I know that we have done some work around abandoned mines. And about 16 billion has been gone to address legacy pollution connected to that. I know that there has been an emphasis on addressing orphaned wells. And again, as a part of the bipartisan infrastructure law or bill, that includes about $4 billion to address that. I think about all of the grants coming out of the Environmental Protection Agency, particularly the Collaborative Problem Solving Grant, again, where the EPA is providing about $40 million for small nonprofits to work on local environmental issues. Again, all of these pieces and all of these resources are coming from the president's agenda. And it's not just, again, the money pieces, but it's also the rulemaking. And when I think about the chemical plants rule and the reductions that are going to come from that, when I think about PFAS and the importance of people being able to drink clean water and establishing the first ever national drinking standard for PFAS, that is major. So I don't have time to go into all of the things that this administration is doing. But again, what I always like to emphasize that a lot of the things that this administration doing was not things that we pulled out the air, is what we heard from people as being an important priority. And going to that last point again of why we need you to make the president's vision a reality is that I'm a firm believer we can't do any of this work in a box, in an ivory tower. It is up to folks like you to hold us accountable. And part of the way that this administration has tried to make sure that, again, we are creating policy that is informed by on the ground experts is through the creation of our advisory council called the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council, better known as WEJAC. These are a group of folks, and we just called in some new members a couple of months ago that come from all different shapes of life, some academics, some communities, some healthcare, whatever, but they have an interest and they have an expertise and some lived experience in environmental injustice. And so their role is to give us at CEQ and our federal agencies formal recommendations on different topics. So all those things I talked about, Justice 40, the EJ scorecard, the climate and economic justice screening tool, those would not have happened if not for the recommendations from this body. And we also, what I think is more importantly, as we talk about continuing to, what I would say, listen to folks, is that last year, we started what we call the White House Campaign for Environmental Justice. Basically, when I stepped into this role, what I continue to hear from folks is that, we have no idea what the administration is doing on environmental justice. We're not sure who to contact. We don't, we go to the agency's website, we can't find anything, all this stuff, which is real, right? And so what we wanted to do was actually force the Council on Environmental Quality, our staff, other staff within the Executive Office of the President, and our federal agency partners to actually go to community, meet them where they are, but not just come because they're on our list, but when we're requested. And so when we put that offer out there, there were several communities that said, hey, we're trying to tackle with this specific issue. We don't know what agency to talk to. And oh, by the way, we're having some, challenges with our state and local officials. Would CEQ come in and convene a conversation or just show up? And so that is what we've really tried to do. Show up and be a partner, be supportive in whatever way, bring in the folks, dragging the folks that need to be at the table so you can start that conversation. And that is really the point of the campaign. And I think there's several examples that I can share where that has been successful and appreciated. So again, I think what's important in all this is that we're going to continue to be out there. We want to continue to listen and learn. And I will say, because I think as a part of this race that we are all running for justice, we have to also celebrate each other and celebrate those milestones. And no matter how small they are, as I tell my daughters. And so this past July, we had the first ever White House Summit on Environmental Justice in Action. And it was an opportunity for about 100 folks in person to come to the White House, but thousands virtually, to really see and hear from community the progress that this administration has made on environmental justice and the fact that we, again, still have a long way to go, but we go farther together. So it was wonderful. I think it was encouraging. It was also exciting, but also like, hey, we got to recharge because we're not done with this race. So again, want to definitely acknowledge that celebration. So again, I hope that you all will stay connected with us. This is another QR code. We have a twice monthly, or no, maybe it's once a month newsletter now that has a lot of information, gives some updates about what we're doing, funding opportunities, et cetera, that I hope you will stay connected with us. And again, I encourage you to check out the summit. It's on YouTube if you feel like it. It's a couple hours, but it's definitely worth your time. And what I will say is, again, there's a lot of amazing progress that has been happening. But again, we need you to continue to make this vision a reality. And I'll just say, I was reading one of the reports on your website, and there was a line from one of your members that really talked about the perspective and sometimes the invisibility of Black Appalachia. And I just want to say, I hear you, because I feel like our role and my goal is to make sure that nobody feels invisible and that all voices are important, all stories are solid. And I want to make sure that you understand that, I take seriously when I say the White House should be the people's house. So again, appreciate your time. I want to make sure that there is time for our other wonderful speakers. And again, looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Dr. Newsome. That is so wonderful. And I like how you say the White House should be, is the people's house. So I want to thank you. What we're going to do right now is, if there are individuals who have questions, please, I can't see everybody, but please raise your hand, and I'm going to ask that, the Black staff, please help me to identify hands. So we'll take a pause and take questions, because I know Dr. Newsome will not be able to be with us the entire time. Melanie. Melanie, you have the floor. She's on mute. Melanie, you're on mute. Okay, while we're kind of working through that, Akeisha Townsend.
Yes, I just wanted to thank you for coming and doing this really informative lunch and learn. I am interested in this subject both as a community member personally and as a nonprofit professional. And I just wanted to say that I was a little intimidated by the tool at first, but I was able to get into that EJ screen tool and talk with other people in my community about it and, point out some things to city stakeholders that they weren't aware of. And so just really appreciative of that tool and look forward to looking at a lot of the other resources that you pointed out today.
Awesome. Thank you. I think that was that Akeisha. I want to make sure.
Yes.
Yes, it was.
Okay, and I just wanted, so appreciate your comment, and I just want to be really clear. So there are so many federal tools out there. And so I know you said EJ Screen, which is a little bit different. Again, it's the tool that the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, has created, which is a screening. So it has a lot of different variables and data, and which is awesome. And so, but EPA is a screening tool. The CGIS tool is the tool that is used to identify where we are working with our agencies to distribute resources related to the Justice 40 initiative. So just want to be really clear, both very powerful tools, and actually the CGIS uses some of the data from EJ Screen. But yeah, two different tools, but I appreciate you digging in and not being scared and learning and sharing. That's super important. So thank you for what you're doing.
It's good to have you here, Akeisha. Thank you so much. Akeisha was one of our, as we would say, helping to be a founding mother when Black launched in 2021. I am going to ask, I see that there are several people named Ben Hunkler. So if you could change your name so that we can call you correctly by your name and honor that, because that's, respectful. So if you could, there's 3 dots and it just says rename, and please do that. So I see a hand from Nita Jade, Dr. Newsome. Nita Jade, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Bishop Marcia. I am relaying a question from Sally Roberts from Rise Up West Virginia, who asked in the chat, I would be grateful to know what your thoughts recommendations would be around the construction of health impact agreements as part of the community benefit agreements. Would this be part of 14096?
Boy, that's really interesting. And thank you for that question. I know particularly as it relates to what I work a lot on and work with our partners at the Department of Energy, our community benefits agreements, and understanding those as it relates to some of the carbon capture and sequestration work that is happening across this country. And I don't think I've seen enough of health impact assessments being a part of those. And so I think that is, first of all, I think that's super innovative. I think that should be a part of any agreement, particularly as it relates to community benefits, in addition to the jobs and the other things that are usually more easy to quantify and put in there. But I think, so I totally agree. And I think where possible, push for that. When it comes to EO 140196, which is the executive order that President Biden signed last year, revitalizing our nation's commitment to environmental justice for all, I don't have the words in front of me, but when you talk about health and assessment, that is a core part of the executive order. The one additional piece that I will raise is that the president, as a part of that executive order, told us that we have to create a national environmental justice science data and research plan. And to do that in partnership with our Office of Science and Technology Policy, better known as OSTP. So OSTP and CEQ have this research plan that was just released in late January. As a part of that, and I encourage you to Google it and read it, or I can share a link to it. There is health, there is assessments, there is, again, stressing the importance not only of engagement, but getting data that is sometimes hard to get, but important to inform and should inform policy. And so I would say probably a resounding yes, that connection of EO 14096 is very much relative to where you're going in terms of having an HIA or health impact assessment as a part of your community benefits agreement. And then just making sure that, there's a difference between a community benefits plan and agreement. And so just realizing that difference and making sure one is enforceable and one isn't. So making sure that that's solid and that everybody is actually a part of creating that agreement. So thank you for your question. Happy to dig in a little bit deeper if needed.
Thank you, Dr. Newsome. We have a question in the chat that I'm going to ask first, and then after that, after you answer that, we'll have Tamala Trussell ask her question. So this question is from Christina, and please, Christina, don't charge it to my head and not my heart if I mispronounce your last name, Maruzik. And her question says, she says, "Hi, I'm a journalist with the national nonprofit media organization, Environmental Health News. This question is for Dr. Newsome. What steps is the Biden administration taking to ensure that federal agencies are following the spirit of these new EJ policies, rather than just checking all the right boxes? I'm thinking specifically about what I'm hearing from community members related to the Appalachian Hydrogen Hub regarding community engagement with the DOE."
Yeah, I appreciate that question. And so I'll address it in a couple of ways. One, when we talk about, or when I talk about the power of an executive order, it's serious. And so EO 14096, again, encourage you to download it and read it, everybody. Another part of it is that it requires the development of agency-specific strategic plans to advance environmental justice. Now, again, in previous administrations, and I think, the reality that I've heard from communities, and even when I was on the other side, I would say, well, yeah, they have a plan, no big deal. Like the plans would be 2 lines and they wouldn't be really substantive. But with this particular executive order, and the energy that we are feeling from our agency partners, these plans will be solid, they will be substantive, but most importantly, as a part of this executive order, we will be assessing progress on each of these plans. So it's not just going to be words on a paper that nobody looks at and just shelves. So that is, I think, the difference between the past and now. And the other thing that I think is powerful is that the president, in his first day in office, created, here's another acronym, the White House Environmental Justice Interagency Council, better known as the IAC. But basically, it is EJ officers that are career and political staff. So your long-term and your political folks that are part of these agencies that come together to talk about ways to advance environmental justice. So it's our internal community of learning and practice across our agencies. So we have a set of agencies and leaders within those agencies, both at the political and the career level, that are committed to making sure that what is in the executive order, the initiatives that the president is driving are actually operationalized. So that's critical. To the second part of your question, I spend a lot of my time working with our partners at the Department of Energy, Department of Transportation, PHMSA, on, again, making sure that we support the safe deployment of these different technologies. I know, and I continue to hear in many different forms, the concerns that communities have that there is not transparency, there's not enough information, there is fear of the technology, and I understand all those concerns. And what I will say is a couple of things. When I started in this position a little bit over 2.5 years ago, we specifically created a work group as a part of the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council, the WEJAC, that body of EJ leaders from across the country, to address carbon capture technologies and hydrogen. So we have received the first set of recommendations from that body. We're expecting a second set in a couple of weeks, maybe a couple of weeks, 3 weeks, a month, very soon. And so what we are doing is really taking into consideration those recommendations and working with an internal team, including our agency partners, on how to address all the issues that have been raised by this body, which includes, again, some of the concerns that you raised. And so I just want to let you know that that is major and did not exist before. I think as always, as I say to everybody, we have an open door. And, if there are conversations that communities are not able to have or not able to connect or don't feel satisfied, that they're having with some of our agency partners, it is CEQ's role and, to help intervene where possible and try and again be that bridge of understanding, one, to understand what the agencies are doing and really understand what we can do better with this administration. So again, we are working hard to listen, but to also operationalize some of the recommendations that we've gotten from that work group, and they're continuing to meet. And I thank you for your question.
Thank you, Dr. Newsome. I will turn it over to Tamala Trussell. And just for the sake of your time, I know that you're with us for a specific amount of time. So how can you take another question, or how should we wrap up? We can also add, have the question sent to you via email for those that we do not get an answer, we cannot get to today, as well as just some of the people, the concerns that are, within the chat, to just, if you'd be open to having another conversation as a community, that would be great, because I see that there are other concerns and questions as well that I know we may not be able to get to. So Tamala, I turn it over to you.
Kind of been answering some of parts of my question, but I'm just wondering, it seems like the fracking community, carbon capture and storage, hydrogen hubs, all of them are actually using the social justice 40 for their benefit financially, and also trying to put these in social justice communities, which are harmful to their health and the environment's health. So how, you've kind of been talking about how you're mitigating that, but it's just something we're seeing. So yeah, thanks.
Yeah, no, appreciate that. And, what I will say is that the Justice 40 initiative, part of the reason why, to your point, that these projects, both carbon capture and hydrogen, are a part of the Justice 40 initiative is because it has some guardrails that wouldn't exist if not from the Justice, if it wasn't a part of the Justice 40 initiative. So the fact that it is a part of Justice 40, it heightens the awareness that, again, we have to have, at least for DOE funded projects, because there are some projects that are funded by private, but that we have to have community benefits agreements, that we, meaning our partners at DOE, are going to be engaged in a different way. And again, I know there's mixed feelings about the outreach and the that is happening in some areas, and I understand that. There is a sense that there are benefits that are coming to these communities. And again, acknowledging that some of these areas are already dealing with their a level of impacts that are negative. So I definitely understand your point, and I understand the reality that people are feeling. And really, Justice 40, as much as it's a vehicle, again, for the deployment of funds, is also the vehicle for our agencies to think differently about how they operate. And because, and I'd like to make this clear, we were directed by Congress to have this money, that money that is apportioned for carbon capture. So we really didn't have a choice. And a lot of, folks, again, that's not an excuse, it's a reason. So when you are given something where you don't have a lot of flexibility, our approach is, what is the way, and this is just Jalan's words, what is the way that we can make this the best and safest deployment possible with people that, again, from both CEQ's perspective and again, our agency partners at DOE, DOT, et cetera, that understand the values and concerns of community. in a way that if it wasn't a part of the Justice 40 initiative, if we didn't have this administration, it would be even less of what you're seeing now. And I'm the first person to say that nothing is perfect. And I wish I had magic where I could snap my fingers and all of the environmental injustices across this country could be gone and we could do, but that's not the case. So we're trying to work within the constraints that we have in the best way possible. But again, I am always open to hearing from anybody about what's not working and how we can be a partner to make it work better. So I appreciate your comment.
Thank you, Dr. Newsome. Melanie, and we'll make Melanie the last question because we do have 2 additional speakers that we want to get to.
And Bishop, I'll just say, I don't see any of the chat because we can't do any of the fancy things at the White House. So I don't know if folks are yelling at me, screaming at me or whatever, but feel free to share that chat with me. And I'd be happy to have another conversation at any time. So I just want to put that out there. But Melanie, please.
Yes, I will do that, Dr. Newsome. I'll share the chat with you. And also, if you could put the document that you mentioned give us a link to that. We do send out a toolkit or, an information and resources post the Lunch and Learn so that we can make sure, folks have, the things that you are mentioning. Melanie, the floor is yours. We're still having technical difficulties on her end. One of the questions that she had was about, oh, there she goes. Okay, there you go. We can't hear you now. Try coming off mute again. Okay, there you go. Okay, we can't hear you now. I do know one of the questions that Melanie put in the chat was a meeting with Edith Abeta. Basically, what she was saying is that in Clariton, that Justice 40, the community has concerns about how Justice 40 is or isn't working or being misused. And basically just having a conversation, post that with the community. And as stated, and the invitation is there. Dr. Newsome, if you would be willing, if we were able to put together a community meeting so that folks within Clariton or in Allegheny County can discuss EJ 40 and their concerns about it. And then I think there's this understanding of who is the EJ community because of the fact that I know I've heard, and this is just in conversations, that some communities may not qualify for certain things under some of the things that the Biden administration is putting out, simply because of just how things are being looked at, not so much as by race, but by education, and that's one of the things that we were told that, rather than folks looking at Black communities, that it's looking at the education in the communities, which may or may not posture them for specific resources.
So, and Melanie, happy to figure out how we can create a conversation and organize that. But I want to be real clear. The Justice 40 initiative is about making sure that 40% of the overall benefits land in communities. There's really no one that is disqualified. So when we talk about benefits, and I think this is the thing, you could have a community that is on the tool that I talked about, the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool. You could click on it and it might not come up as a disadvantaged community as defined by us. But if there is something that is going on in that census tract that's not technically considered disadvantage, but it's actually benefiting a community that is defined as disadvantaged, then there's no restrictions as to that community that's not considered disadvantaged receiving resources to help other communities that are disadvantaged if the benefit will be received by another location. So I just want to be clear, no one is disqualified because again, it's 40%. So the metrics that are part of the CJIS, the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool, include socioeconomic, they include environmental, they include health. That those metrics are part of our methodology to determine if a census tract is considered disadvantaged or not disadvantaged, but that does not disqualify anybody. So I want to be real clear because I know that is always kind of a point of confusion. It's where the benefits will be flowing to. So if, for example, in Allegheny County, and again, I don't know, and maybe I should have looked it up and did my homework, if there are census tracts that are considered to be disadvantaged, then you will, by default, be on the radar of agencies that are trying to fulfill that Justice 40 goal. Because their goal is to figure out, well, how can I make sure that my whatever community change grant program or whatever is going to, benefit these communities that are considered disadvantaged. But that does not disqualify other places. And what I also encourage folks to understand is that, as with any tool, the CJIS is good and we stand by it, but it's not perfect. And so as you see discrepancies or things that don't make sense, you're like, wait a minute, this community, they have $1 million homes here, but you're showing it as disadvantaged. I mean, the diversity of our country is immense. And there are some things that are not accurately depicting what's happening on the ground. And there are some, so again, where you see those things that we should be aware of, those discrepancies, please let us know. Because the beautiful part about this is the tool is not stagnant. We are actually in updates now. So we will continue to update both the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool, the EJ Scorecard every year. And our hope is that we will get better and better data. So please don't think of the tool as a hindrance. Don't think of it as something that leaves certain people out. It is merely a way that our agency partners can figure out, where they can focus, but it doesn't disqualify anybody. I hope that's helpful.
It is very helpful, and some have even put in there, just ways that we can work together. And again, the chat will be shared. There are some questions and requests in there as well that I'll make sure that we highlight, Dr. J. And again, thanking you, for sharing with us, as well as just the acknowledgement that, everything is not perfect and that this process is iterative because it's a new process. It's something that I don't think government has done before. I also appreciate the fact that, you're putting out there that these are not excuses. These are reasons why some, things happen. And as with anything, there's time to it. And also, just the fact of knowing that it's not always the intent. And I think sometimes in the work we label things as the intent of other agencies of wanting to do certain things when in fact you're just carrying out, what your boss is saying. So, but just the fact that I know CEQ has reached out to Black and invited us into conversations, been part of conversations, and we would definitely like to continue that because again, the way that we're going to get through this is together.
Yes.
And the way that we're going to get through this is understanding and learning how to use the tools and the things that are there. And again, appreciating the fact that this is a learning and iterative process that's calling all of us in to learn together and willingly. So again, thank you for your sharing. Thank you for all that you do and for carrying out, the work that you do and being a climate fighter. And a fellow Michiganian too, because I was Michigan to Ohio. So thanking you so much. And we are getting lots of thanks in the chat. And so with that being said, if you have a closing remark that, please by far, go ahead, and then I'll turn it over to Sonia Kakiri who is the Director of Policy and Civic Engagement, and somebody that I truly admire and have had the opportunity to work with on so many things with Emerald Cities Collaborative. She'll come right after you.
I don't want to take too much time. I've already taken too much. I just want to say thank you and appreciation. The one thing that I will say is that we don't have the luxury of time. So if you have questions or concerns or things that you're trying to grind on, we got to make it happen over the next couple months. So we don't have time because we don't know what the future holds. I said yesterday to some folks, there is this inherent fear of the future of what's to come. None of us can predict it. But my thing is, I'm not going to be scared, but be prepared. So that's what I'm telling you, be prepared. So I'll end with that.
Thank you. And again, thank you for sharing and participating with us in this Lunch and Learn. So it is my honor and my privilege to turn it over now to Sonia Kakiri.
Hi, y'all. My name is Sonia. Big shoes to follow after Dr. White Newsome. So thanks for having me, Bishop Marcia. My presentation is going to be a little bit different, so bear with me, and I hope that maybe it holds some balm for the tension that we're holding in this space. So my name is Sonia. I live on the land on the Susquehannock, which was colonized and renamed as Pennsylvania, Central Pennsylvania. I am first gen American. My parents both immigrated here. And I have had the privilege at Emerald Cities Collaborative to be the National Director for Civic Infrastructure and really look at what are the ways in which people can have direct impact on policy implementation in spaces that are local and then also at the national level. So I wanted to, again, this is going to be a very different tone. We're going to do some interactivity. I wanted to just start with an exercise that was created by an organization called Movement Generation in a presentation that they called Eco Means Home. So if you can put in the chat, when you hear the word economy, what does that make you think of? What words come up for you? What feelings? And I'll make sure to share out loud. Money, yeah, come on, let's be real. We live in a capitalist America here. Profits, greed. Yep, greed, profit, capitalism, housing inequities, capitalism, priority, consolidation. Ooh, monopolies. Let's talk about it. Oh, homemaking. Oh, someone's clued in to where we're going. Consumption, systems of trade, offers given and received. Oh, it was economy. What do we think of when you hear the word economy? Consumption. Yeah, so a lot of things are coming up, and that's in the right now. Okay, so now I'm going to ask you to travel back in time. Go back 300, 500 years. You might be on different lands than we are on today, your ancestors on different lands. What would be the words you would describe economy in a different context? Barter, recycling, agriculture, survival, relationship, exchange of resources, make do with what you have, co-production, trade, reciprocity, sustenance, community sustainability. Yeah, just a very different relationship with that word. Thank you all for engaging with that. So I'm going to share, sorry, I should move this ahead. Oh, everything moved over to the screen. So yeah, economy, eco really means home. So how are we taking care of our home? How are we stewarding and taking care? So eco means home and nomi means management stewardship. So adding these two words together, economy can just mean the management or the care of the home. How do we organize our relationships in a place to take care of each other and the place? So economy isn't inherently, financial markets, money, trading. Well, maybe a little bit of trading, gross domestic product, all these big buzzwords of capitalism today. Even though that might be the constant narrative. And we also sometimes feel like there can be no alternative, but we know, remembering our past relationships and our ancestors' relationships with the land and resources, that there are alternatives that we can imagine, rebuild, and realize. So I just wanted to quote a passage from the Energy Democracy book, written by Michelle, and I apologize if I mispronounced the last name, Mascarenhas. Economy is management of the home. It's how we organize our relationships in a place, ideally to take care of place and each other. But management of the home can be good or bad, depending on how you do it and to what ends. The purpose of economy can be turning land and labor into profit for a few, or it can be returning land, life, and labor into a balanced web of stable relationships. Economy does not mean money or exchange or financial markets or trading. These are simply elements or tools of specific economies. Economies, or how we manage our home, can be measured in many ways. How healthy is the soil? How healthy are the people, the water, the animals? How much wealth is generated? Who owns the wealth? What even constitutes wealth? Is it well-being? Is it happiness? So y'all might be familiar with this framework. It was made by the same folks who made that presentation, Eco Means Home, Movement Generation. And I just want to think about this framework through this economy lens. So here on the left side, you see this extractive economy. And that's probably the current economic reality for many of us. An extractive economy that leaves us at the mercy of oppressive political, social, and economic systems. We can look at our food systems through these lenses: energy, housing, our health economies, transportation. Ultimately, how do we interact with the resources that we need? And then on the right side here, we see what we can reclaim: an authentic relationship between people and planet. And then to get from this extractive economy to a regenerative economy, this framework calls for what we have been told is called a just transition. And we want that just transition to be determined by the most impacted of our current economic realities. And that's really centuries of buildup of this, extractive capitalist economy. And this call to action is really to build the new, to change the rules of the game, and to move resources into balance, one that is regenerative rather than extractive. We do this first and foremost by building community and relationship with one another. And that's really where Black is rooted in, to reclaim our interconnectedness, which is in direct opposition to the current United States economic model that says everyone for themselves, in competition. We're in a moment where we are remembering that our success, our wealth, our liberation is interdependent and dependent on our ability to be in community and build the commons in deep relationship and trust with the planet and the resources she offers. So as we strengthen our community and interconnectedness, we can more strongly practice things like democracy. We can diversify based on our knowledge of the lands, animals, and people. We can invest in local economies and ultimately shift the relationship and flow of resources and wealth. And I wanted to highlight one initiative that's really been focused on this, and it's called the Ubuntu Climate Initiative. Ubuntu is a word, the tagline for Ubuntu is reuniting people and planet. Ubuntu means I am because we are, because you are. And this initiative started by Denise Fairchild, who was also the inaugural CEO and president of Emerald Cities Collaborative, is really about this remembering of relationship and reclaiming, to say that we know in our DNA how to be in symbiosis and in a true authentic economy with resources. It's really looking at this values transformation as a key part of the just transition, to go from this individualistic, production-oriented, materialist approach to really remembering what does it mean to access resources, to thrive, to have wealth mean health, happiness, joy, relationship, and just think differently about how we value. And I know this is not maybe necessarily like, oh, Sonia, you're just talking in the air. What does all this mean? Ubuntu is actually really looking at this through a lens of policy, education, and arts and culture in the now. Really disruptive things and harmful things have happened in our lives and in our ancestors' lives, and most recently we can think about big market shifts in 2009 and now because of COVID. We can think about COVID and how it's devastated our communities. and how that's opened up change opportunities because the planet and the people said, no more, no more. And that's a really hard shift. And we saw, the Biden-Harris administration, as the previous speaker kind of spoke on it, try to address and respond to these big shifts and this need for a new way of being in relationship with home and resources. So yeah, so what does all this, fun stuff have to do with federal funding? If we're really trying to think through a liberatory perspective, it has to do with, maybe a lot and a little at the same time. At the core of this work is our ability to reclaim a regenerative existence. That colonization and white supremacy has interrupted for a number of centuries, and that work's been ongoing. Many, many generations, we are building on that work. And so in theory, this maybe relies very little on the resources presented by the federal government. However, at the same time, and in great tension with that work towards liberation, we have to meet the material needs of the now. And this is really hard. This is my existential crisis every day, y'all, of how I know that these federal resources are the master's tools and therefore not going to get me free. And on the other hand, I need them to work for me in my communities because they have to help us now, because we need help now, because we're experiencing harm now. And so we need people in every lane. We need the Dr. J's, we need the Denises, we need all of y'all and all the work that you're doing to contend with these big things, to really work towards a regenerative and authentic economy. And that's where Emerald Cities published this community benefits playbook. It was really trying to look at the federal resources coming out in the past 3-4 years as a way to build community capacity to lead on the implementation of those resources. The playbook itself really dives into what's the truth. Like we're not the federal government. We get to say a little bit more than they get to say, right? What's the truth behind the Justice 40 initiative? And what's it opening the door to? What is the leverage it is giving communities in this moment of implementation and huge investment, historic, once in a generation? I don't know if that's true anymore, folks, because we're going to need a lot more of this money. And it looks at it through these different sectors, and talks about, again, like the sector pivot points. But we don't want to say that the sectors aren't interconnected, right? They're very connected. You cannot talk about energy without talking about water, without talking about land, without talking about economic justice. So they're sector playbooks to help dive in, but please don't see them as disconnected by any means. But ultimately what it ends on, and I'm going to apologize because we published this before the federal government made their community benefits plans definition. But the ultimate capacity building part of this playbook is really, how do communities define the benefits that they want to see, the programs, the infrastructure investments, the jobs that they want to see coming into their communities. So at the end of the day, while we're analyzing the content and, the verbiage of the statutes, we're also trying to think, what's the process that all these resources need to go through to actually yield equitable and reparative and restorative outcomes? And that's where we really are looking at, what is the community capacity to engage and lead in this conversation of implementation, particularly in places where governance structures actively work against you, where you never touched the resources to begin with, and now they're saying it's for you, but how do I actually, where I haven't seen this money, is Justice 40 money? This is all great questions. So this is a lot of tension that we're holding. And we just want to realistically talk about, okay, so what does a heat pump mean to me? Or what does a rebate mean to me? Or what does, community change dollars mean to me? And all these different pieces of the puzzle and how to plug them together. And that's what Emerald Cities is really trying to do, that while also holding these tools, like Dr. J said, are imperfect. They are not meant to get us fully free, but what can they address in the now? So I just wanted to give an overview of that. And I also wanted to make some time. I'll make sure to put my email address and the website for the playbook in the chat so y'all have it. And I'll make sure these slides get sent out to Bishop Marcia and Ben so they can be circulated amongst y'all. But I'm happy to open it up for discussion and conversation right now. And hopefully Bishop Marcia, I was hitting on some of the points you wanted me to.
No, you were fine. Thank you so much. And again, Emerald Cities has put out a wonderful Justice 40 playbook. I think that it gives step-by-step instructions, ways to understand Justice 40. And their website has a dearth of information. And the, Justice 40 playbook, I believe also just brings about more of a foundational understanding and is a tool that we can, use in this work. So I want to thank Sonia and Emerald Cities for preparing that. Dr. Ford, I did see your hand up earlier. So do you have a question? And for others who have a question, please feel free to raise your hand or put your question in the chat, and we will ask it to Sonia. Dr. Ford.
No, I'm sorry. Somehow I must have hit that inadvertently. So no, I didn't have a question. That's why I took my hand down. But I will say that I am enjoying immensely this entire Lunch and Learn. It is so informative. And please keep up the good work. This is wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ford. And as always, thank you for your support. Anybody have a question? Sally Roberts did say, thank you for your grounding presentation. I really look forward to reading the playbook. Sonia did put her email in there, as well as a link to the playbook. And if you don't get that information today, we definitely will add it to the resource or the toolkit that we send out to everyone. All right, looks like you did a phenomenal job, Sonia. No questions. So thank you as always for joining us and supporting the work of Black. I see where you've gotten 2 thumbs up from Dr. Pressey, Apostle Ford, and compliments within the chat. So with that being said, and a big heart from Makisha Townsend, thumbs up from Ben. And I am now going to turn it over to Patty DeMarco. And again, thank you, Sonia.
Well, thank you so very much. I will keep this really short. I just felt that at the close of this session, it would be important for us to reflect on the fact that the green economy does give us a chance to redress some of the patterns of the past. Next slide, please, Ben. When we were talking about shifting from an economy that's from a civilization that's focused on the economy, as Sonia was just talking about, we need to rebalance so that we look at the relationships between the environment and the society and the economy better. Because when you focus on mostly the economy, the things that flip out of the picture that become reduced or diminished are things like ethics, especially in business transactions, environmental justice, and workers' rights. And when you go to things like green technology, if you don't include those social justice and environmental justice parameters, you get things like fracking and hydrogen hubs that may not necessarily actually balance those kinds of considerations if you're just looking at the economic output. Next slide. And so we know that we need to reduce our carbon reduction goals in order to keep the life as a habitable place. We have to reverse direction. And the legislation passed historically, 4 major pieces of legislation within a 2-year period is quite remarkable. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, the Infrastructure and Jobs Bill, and the CHIPS Act have all really made a tremendous number of tools available to us to begin this transformation. Next slide. I'm going to go through these pretty quickly, that it's our time to choose a new direction. Next slide. And we have to look at the fact that we are making decisions today, every day, that are going to affect the fate of the next generation. And that makes this whole approach to incorporating the new economy in a more just and equitable way a responsibility that we bear to not just ourselves, but to our children. And I think this is something that policymakers often lose sight of. They're so caught up with the day-to-day immediate implications, the immediate economic impact, the immediate political impact, that we forget that we are looking at the fate and the future of our children and our grandchildren. Next slide, please. So we have to look at protecting benefits and pensions, meaningful retraining and upskilling of the workforce, and actually reinvesting in communities rather than simply putting money down the same funnels that they have always flowed before, and put that lens of environmental and social justice into the framework of our budget making and policy planning. Next. So the AFL-CIO International Conference has said that we really need to have decent work and quality jobs and protect the environment at the same time. Next slide. So we have a lot of myths that the clean economy doesn't really provide good jobs, that they're all lower caliber jobs than were the true in the industrial past. But if you look at the average national payment for clean energy sectors, it's above the national average in most categories. And there are also a whole range of education requirements for the jobs in these fields, so that you can look at having good jobs with meaningful production and also life-supporting and just jobs. These are not things that need to be diminished in quality just because they're a new field or a new way of looking at. Many of these fields are not unionized at this time, and people say, oh, well, if it's not a union job, it isn't a good job. But that isn't necessarily true. Next slide. I also wanted to show you that the Inflation Reduction Act money flowing has actually mostly gone to congressional districts that have low median incomes below the national average. That's this big orange 3/4 of the circle. So when Dr. Jalone White Newsome was talking about their intention to direct the funding as much as possible to communities of need, the data that has distributed money already indicates that that has been the case. Now, did every community get what they think they need right now? Probably not, but certainly the trend is in that direction. Also, compared to energy communities, communities that have the kind of facilities that we've been talking about in this Petrochemical Lunch and Learn series, they have in fact received, this is the post-Inflation Reduction Act numbers, they have received a greater proportion of the funding than was true before the Inflation Reduction Act. And that's also true even for non-energy communities. There are more funds flowing than had been true before. So it is beginning to have an impact. Next slide, please. And there also have been already 170,000 new jobs. They're looking at 1.5 million by 2030. And it has increased the disposable income, and 150,000 of those jobs have been in manufacturing. And so what we're looking at here is an opportunity to not only address the climate challenges that we have by moving to a clean economy, but also to make some redress to the disparities that have occurred in the past. And it takes a while for these kinds of things to overcome the massive inertia, but with the deliberate effort, I think we can do that. Next slide. And it also has had, in the 10 pollution rules that were enacted, and Dr. Jalone Newsome referred to these a little bit, there have been 10 regulations in the EPA that have made additions to the air quality regulations. And it has, in fact, avoided a number of premature deaths, severe asthma symptom incidents, and restricted activity days because of those regulations. And the benefits have clearly exceeded the costs of implementing these regulations. So I will take the next slide. I would just say that we have had a chance to take a U-turn on this policy and begin to make a real difference in not only our climate objectives, but also our justice objectives and our environmental health objectives. And we need to move from just being aware to being outraged enough to actually begin changing the policies that need to continue for these pieces of legislation that have initiated action to continue, build support for action, increase the political pressure, and by all means, you must vote with a climate action lens on your decisions. I will stop there, and hopefully we got enough time to have a few questions.
It's 1:28. If folks
Yeah.
will give us maybe 5 minutes, we can take a few questions and then I can close us out. So are there any questions? Again, please feel free to raise your hand or put them in the chat. Okay, I don't see anything, anyone's hand raised or any comments in the chat. So I want to say thank you, everyone, for joining us today for this inspiring and insightful Lunch and Learn. As we bring our conversation on environmental justice and building a clean energy economy to a close, I want to express my deepest gratitude to our incredible speakers, Dr. Jelon White Newsome, Sonia Kakiri, and Dr. Patricia Marco, for sharing their wisdom, expertise, and actionable solutions with us. Your leadership and dedication to creating equitable, sustainable futures for all communities is truly inspiring. Today, we've explored the critical intersections of environmental justice and the clean energy economy. And we've heard powerful examples of how together, and I say that again, together, we can build healthier, more just, and resilient communities. The insights shared with us today equip us with the knowledge to move forward and continue uplifting those most impacted by environmental challenges. I also want to extend my thanks to the Ohio River Valley Institute, Main Street, and everyone who contribute to making today's event possible. These collaborations are vital as we continue to build momentum towards lasting change. But before we wrap up, I have an ask. I want to encourage each of you to take a moment and to complete our evaluation survey. Ben will put that in the chat. Your feedback is invaluable and helps us to shape future events and initiatives to better serve you. Looking ahead, we invite you to join the movement and support the work of the Black Appalachian Coalition in the following ways. The first one is you can share your story with us, whether it's about your community, your lived experience, or the pressing need for change. I want you to know your voice matters, and storytelling is a powerful tool for justice and transformation. You can also visit the Black website at blackappalachiancoalition.org to join our email list to stay connected with our latest initiatives, updates, and future events. You can follow us on social media to stay informed and help amplify our work. You can join our coalition to become part of the movement towards a just, equitable, and sustainable clean energy future. Additionally, you can be a part of Black by sharing your story on our Black Remembering podcast, where we highlight both the heavy and the hope. This is an opportunity for you to uplift your experiences, speak about the changes you want to see, and inspire others by sharing your journey toward justice and resilience in your community. As Dr. Jelon White Newsome reminded us, we are here to serve more than just ourselves. This is a collective journey, and we must continue working together to create the change we envision for justice and sustainability for all. That means clean air, clean water with clean futures. And finally, I invite you to join us for our next Lunch and Learn, where we will take today's conversation further and build out actionable steps that we can take together to drive meaningful change. Thank you again for being part of today's discussion and for the work you do in your communities. Let us continue to support one another and remember that a change is going to come because of each of you, our change agents, game changers, and instruments of change. I wish you a wonderful day, and we look forward to seeing you at future Black Appalachian Coalition events. And remember, just take 1 minute to complete the survey. If you don't have time today, it will also be in the information that we share with you, which will also include the PDFs of all of the presentations and the recording that happened today. So again, thank you, everybody, and thank you for being the best part of our work, because you are the work in action, the work in movement, and the water that is flowing to each and every community. May you continue to be sustained in all that you do. Take care.